The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the kind of day that had no particular claim to importance until something arrived to make it one. Elias Vance found it beneath a broken plow harness and two overdue notices from the grain merchant in town, a thin envelope sealed with plain wax, the handwriting on the front precise and unhurried, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who did not waste motion on anything, including words. He turned it over once. He set it on the kitchen table. He made coffee first. The house was large by the standards of the territory. 4 rooms downstairs, 2 up, a root cellar, a sleeping loft he had finished only last winter by lantern light because he could not sleep anyway and the wood needed shaping. He had built most of it himself over 3 years, plank by plank, the way a man builds something when he has no reason to hurry and no one waiting for him to finish. The rooms were clean but not warm. There is a difference. Warm means something lives there. Clean only means someone tends it out of discipline. Elias Vance had discipline to spare. He was 34. He had come to the territory 8 years ago with his younger brother, a mule named December, $200, and the kind of quiet determination that passes for courage when no one is watching. His brother had gone back east after the first winter, which was the winter that also took the mule and about $40 to a bad roof repair. Elias had stayed. He always had trouble explaining why, even to himself, except that the land had a particular way of looking at you in the morning, all that flat distance and pale gold light that made the idea of leaving feel like a failure of nerve. He opened the letter on his second cup of coffee. If you are still seeking a partner for your household and farm, he read, I would be willing to discuss the matter. I am 30 years of age. I am in good health. I know how to keep accounts, manage a kitchen, tend animals, and work in whatever capacity is useful. I do not need to be entertained. I need honesty. If honesty is something you can offer, I am prepared to offer the same in return. Her name was Clara Marsh. She had written a second page, which was unusual. Most of the other correspondence he had received in the 2 months since he had placed the notice in 3 different newspapers had been shorter and considerably more vague. One woman had sent a portrait and a list of requirements that included piano lessons and weekly church attendance, neither of which Elias had any objection to in principle, but both of which suggested a fundamental misunderstanding of what his life actually looked like. Clara Marsh had not sent a portrait. On the second page, she had written in the same unhurried hand one additional paragraph. I should tell you that I carry a matter of some complexity with me. I do not think it will cause you harm, but it would be dishonest not to name it. When we have had the opportunity to speak more, I will explain it in full. I ask only that you wait until then before making your judgment. Elias read that paragraph twice. Then he folded the letter, tucked it into the breast pocket of his coat, and went out to finish what was left of the fence. He thought about her phrasing while he worked. A matter of some complexity. A man with less patience would have found that phrase unsettling. Elias found it interesting. He had learned over 8 years on the territory that people who announce their complications in advance are almost always preferable to those who do not. He had also noticed, though he would not have said this to anyone, that her letter sounded less like a woman performing the role of an available woman, and more like a person trying honestly to conduct a difficult piece of business. He respected that. He wrote back the same evening by the same lantern that had watched him finish the loft. If you find the situation here acceptable upon seeing it, then honesty is what I can offer. I will not ask about the complexity until you are ready to tell me. She arrived 6 weeks later on the Thursday stage. He had driven the wagon to town the evening before, stayed at the boarding house, and spent most of the morning standing near the stage office with his hat in his hand because the day was mild and he did not need it on. Edgar Prout, who ran the feed store across the road and had an opinion about everything within a 5-mile radius, leaned out of his doorway and called over. Is that you looking nervous, Vance, or is it someone else wearing your face? It's not nerves, Elias said. Right, said Edgar. The stage was 40 minutes late, which was 40 minutes of watching a street go about its business while trying to appear as though he were not watching anything in particular. When it finally appeared at the far end of the main road, raising a slow cloud of dust behind it, he put his hat back on and walked to the edge of the platform. She was the third passenger out. He recognized her not by any description because she had not sent one, but by the way she came down the stage steps. Not hesitating, not performing confidence either, simply stepping down as a person who has made a decision and is now executing it. She carried a large canvas bag and a smaller leather satchel worn soft with use. She was of medium height, dark-haired, with a face that was composed in the way of someone accustomed to not letting what she felt cross into what she showed. She looked at the street, she looked at the stage office, then she looked at him and he understood immediately that she had already identified him from the same logic he had used to identify her. "Mr. Vance," she said, "Miss Marsh." They shook hands. Her grip was firm without being a statement about it. He took the canvas bag, which was heavier than he had expected. She did not apologize for the weight. "The other case stays with me," she said. "All right." He led her to the wagon. Edgar Prout watched them from the doorway of the feed store with the focused interest of a man who intends to have something to report by sundown. Elias did not look over. Clara did not look over either, though he had a feeling she had noticed him. They drove mostly in silence for the first few miles, which was not uncomfortable. The land spread out in every direction, pale grass and enormous sky, the kind of distance that either frightens people or steadies them. Clara sat beside him on the wagon bench looking at it without apparent distress. "Is it always this open?" she said. It was not quite a question. "In this direction, yes," she nodded. Something in her posture settled slightly, as if the answer had confirmed a calculation she had been running. "Good," she said. He thought about that single word for the next mile, not the land is beautiful, not it's strange, good, as if the openness was something she specifically required. The house sat at the end of a long track bordered on the east by a stand of cottonwood that he had planted the second year because the land needed something vertical. When they came around the last bend and she saw it, she was quiet for a moment. It was late afternoon by then, and the low sun was doing something kind to the stone of the front wall, giving it a color almost like warmth. He watched her from the side of his vision. "You built this," she said, "most of it. It's solid. I tried for that." He carried her canvas bag inside. She carried the leather satchel herself. He showed her the kitchen, the main room, the two upper bedrooms. He had put clean linens on both. She walked through each space without comment, touching a windowsill here, a doorframe there, reading the house the way a person reads a map. They had supper that first evening with the kind of careful politeness of two people who understand they are beginning something that cannot be undone by impatience. She had found the dry goods without being shown and had made a simple meal from what was there. He had rebuilt the kitchen shelves in March, and she ran a hand along one of them as she passed, checking the level the way a carpenter would. "It's even," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what I was checking." After supper, she asked if she could see the account ledger. He brought it out. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and went through it page by page with the focused attention of someone who had done this before, which was interesting. She asked 3 questions, all of them practical. She did not comment on any of the numbers. He watched her face for something and found nothing he could read clearly, which was also interesting. "The grain cost went up considerably in the 3rd year," she said. "Drought the year before. And you held the margin." "Barely." She set the ledger down and folded her hands on top of it. "You are a careful man." "I try to be." There was a pause. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwood stand. "The matter I mentioned in my letter," she said. "I'll tell you when we've been here a little longer, not because I'm afraid to, because some things need a proper moment. I told you I wouldn't ask. I know what you told me." She looked at him then with a directness that was not aggressive but was entirely unguarded, as if she were simply holding the words up for him to examine. He met it, he did not look away. "All right," he said. She went upstairs and he washed the dishes, and when the house was quiet, he stood at the kitchen window for a long time looking at nothing in particular. The cottonwood leaves made a dry sound in the wind. He realized somewhere in the middle of that quiet that the house already felt different, not warmer yet, but fuller, like a room in which someone has just opened a window and let the outside air come in. The weeks that followed had a shape to them. Not the rigid shape of rules or polite agreements, but the organic shape of two careful people learning where the other one fits. Clara had a way of being present in a space without demanding it. She did not redecorate or rearrange or make grand suggestions. She observed first. She found the weaknesses in a system before proposing anything to replace them. He noticed she had looked at the root cellar 3 times before she said anything, and what she finally said was simply, "The ventilation is wrong on the south side," which was true and which he had known for a year but had not gotten to. She had it fixed before he asked how. She kept the leather satchel in her room and he did not touch it and did not ask. It sat on the small table beside the window, not hidden but not offered. He noticed it each morning when he passed her door on his way downstairs, and he noticed it was always positioned the same way, the clasp facing out, as if she wanted to be able to open it quickly. They worked the land together beginning in the 2nd week, because that was simply necessary and she had said she could work and she was not wrong. She was not fast, but she was steady, which was better than fast. She had a way with the animals that he had seen in very few people, a kind of physical patience that animals recognized as trustworthy. The 2 draft horses that had given him trouble all spring let her handle them on the 3rd day as if she had always been there. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "My father kept horses." It was the most she had said about her life before. He did not press. She had a way of releasing information in small, precisely measured amounts, like water through a controlled gate, and he understood the pace of it well enough to wait. In the evenings, they read or worked at the table, each occupied with something separate, and this too had a comfort to it that he had not anticipated. He had expected the evenings to be difficult, full of the specific awkwardness of 2 strangers managing proximity, but they were not. She did not need to fill silence with talk. He did not need it either. Edgar Prout, who came out one Thursday evening to discuss a boundary question, sat with them for supper and afterwards said to Elias very quietly near the door, "She's not what I expected." Elias had asked what he had expected. Edgar thought about it. "Softer," he said. "She looks like someone who's held the whole of something alone for a long time." Elias turned that over for several days afterward. The understanding between them deepened in the small ways that understanding does. He learned that she took her coffee before she could hold a proper conversation. She learned that he thought better outside and would sometimes step onto the porch in the middle of a problem and stand there for 5 minutes before coming in with an answer. He fixed the gate latch she had mentioned twice. She repaired the water trough he had been avoiding because the angle was awkward and it required working prone in the mud, which she did without complaint on a cold morning, emerging with mud on her coat and an expression of pure professional satisfaction. He handed her a cloth and she wiped her face with it and said, "It'll hold until spring, then you'll need to replace the whole base." He wrote it in the ledger. He liked writing things in the ledger that she said. There were things he was beginning to feel that he did not name. He was not in the habit of naming them. He knew he looked for her when she wasn't in his line of sight. He knew the kitchen was the room he most wanted to be in at the end of the day. He knew that when she laughed, which was rare and small and slightly reluctant, as if she were surprised by it herself, he felt something in his chest adjust, like a timber settling more fully into a joint. He did not say any of this. He built a better shelf unit for the pantry instead, measured and fitted precisely, and she ran her hand along the edge of it the same way she had the first one and said, "Even," and he felt unreasonably pleased. It was in the 5th week that the first sign of the complication appeared, though he did not recognize it as that at the time. A letter came for her from an address in the east, a city address, the handwriting tight and formal. She read it at the kitchen table while he was mending a harness strap, and he saw her face go through 3 different things in the space of a minute, none of which she allowed to settle into anything he could name. She folded the letter. She put it in her apron pocket. "Anything pressing," he said, not looking up from the harness. "Not yet," she said. He heard the not yet. He did not ask about the yet. 2 weeks after that, a second letter arrived from the same address. She was outside when it came, and he set it on the table for her and thought nothing more of it until he came in for the midday meal and found her standing at the kitchen window holding both letters, the new one and the previous one placed side by side on the sill, reading them with the specific focus of someone trying to find the difference between them. When she heard him, she gathered them both and set them in her apron pocket. She did not look flustered. She looked like someone choosing the right moment with great care. "There's cold chicken," she said. "Clara," she turned. He was standing at the door with his hat off. "When you're ready," he said. "Not before." Something in her face shifted very slightly, the way a door shifts on well-fitted hinges when the temperature changes, barely visible but real. "Soon," she said. That evening he found her in the upper room that faced east, the one he used as a kind of storeroom, sitting on a crate near the window with the leather satchel open in her lap. She did not close it when he appeared in the doorway. He stood there and she looked at him for a long moment. "Sit down," she said. He pulled a crate over and sat. She reached into the leather satchel and brought out a folded document, official-looking, the paper thick and slightly stiff. She held it for a moment. Then she gave it to him. He read it. He read it twice. When he looked up at her, she was watching him with that same composed directness, but her hands were together in her lap, and her fingers were pressed together hard enough that the color had changed slightly at the joints. The document was a marriage record, not a dissolution, an existing marriage 8 years old. A man named Peter Marsh, currently of the eastern city whose address appeared on the 2 letters. The document also included, clipped to the back of it, a court filing dated 14 months ago seeking formal dissolution. Beneath the court filing was a second document, a letter from an advocate, stating that the petition had been delayed indefinitely due to the respondent's objection. He set the documents down on his knee. The room was very quiet. "I applied for the dissolution," she said. "When he left, he was gone 4 years before I stopped waiting for him to come back. He didn't come back. He found someone in the city and stayed. I started the legal process. He objected, not because he wanted to return, but because he did not want to release what he considered a claim. He owns a claim," Elias said. His voice was very level. "He believes he does. His advocate believes the petition will eventually succeed, but eventually has been 14 months so far." He looked at the documents again. He looked at her hands, still pressed together. "The letters," he said, "his advocate, twice now, asking me to withdraw the petition in exchange for a financial settlement. I have refused both times. Why? Because accepting his money would mean accepting his terms. And his terms include a stipulation that I not remarry without his formal consent, which he would withhold." She paused. "He wants the leverage. He doesn't want me. He hasn't wanted me in 8 years. He wants the control." The wind moved through the cottonwood outside. Elias looked at the documents for a long time without speaking. She did not fill the silence. She sat with it the way she sat with all difficult things, present and still. "When you wrote to me," he finally said, "you knew this. Yes, you still came. I told you there was a complexity. I told you I would explain it when we had spoken more. I didn't deceive you, I delayed." "There's a difference," he said. "Yes," she said quietly. "There is." He stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark land. The horizon was a pale line, the last of the evening. He could see the cottonwood stand as a dark shape against a slightly less dark sky. He had planted those trees in his second year because he wanted something that would still be there when he was gone. He thought about that now, standing at the window, turning the documents over in his hands without looking at them. "What does your advocate say about the timeline?" he said. 6 months, perhaps a year. He's confident of the outcome. Peter has no grounds, he has only obstruction. Is he dangerous? A pause, not physically. He's a man who uses paperwork the way another man might use a fence, to mark what he thinks belongs to him. Elias turned back to face her. She was watching him the way she had watched the wide land the first day, with a specific kind of steadiness that was not indifference but was close in texture to courage. "You should have told me sooner," he said. "Yes, not much sooner." "But I know, did you think I would send you back?" The question sat between them. She considered it with the same care she considered everything. "I thought you might," she said, "and I needed to know whether you were the kind of man who would, before I let myself believe this was what it felt like." "What does it feel like?" he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Safe," she said. "For the first time in a very long time, it feels like a place where I could be known entirely, which is something I had stopped expecting to find." He went downstairs. She heard him in the kitchen. He came back 20 minutes later with 2 cups of coffee, which he had made wrong because it was late and he'd been distracted, too strong and slightly bitter, and he handed her one without apology and sat down on the crate again. "I'm not sending you back," he said. She held the cup in both hands. "I'm going to write to my advocate in the morning," he said, "and you're going to give me the name of yours." "Why?" "Because if this man is going to use paperwork as a fence," Elias said, "then we're going to build a better one." She looked at the cup. She almost smiled, not quite, but almost. "The coffee is terrible," she said. "I know, I was thinking about something else." I noticed. It was the closest thing to easy between them that there had been yet, and it sat in the room like the first warmth after a long cold, modest and real and entirely sufficient. The months that followed were the proving of a thing, not the beginning of it. Elias understood, looking back on it later, that the thing had already been underway without his having named it, growing the way solid things grow, not quickly and not with much show. What the months provided was the pressure that shows you whether a thing is truly sound. They had no shortage of pressure. Peter Marsh's advocate wrote twice more, once with an increased financial offer and once with a veiled legal threat that Elias' own advocate dismissed as bluster in a tone that suggested he found it mildly insulting. Elias wrote to Clara about each letter with the same plain language he used for everything else, laying out the situation as a set of facts to be managed, and she received these reports with the same stillness she brought to most things. But he noticed that she slept less easily in the weeks when the letters arrived, and he noticed this because he was awake himself, and he heard the particular sound of a person lying still but not resting. One night in November, he went downstairs to make himself something warm and found her already at the kitchen table with a lamp and a book she was not reading. She looked up. He put the kettle on. "He won't stop," she said. "He'll stop when the court tells him to. That could be spring. Then it'll be spring." She turned the unread page. He poured 2 cups of something that was not quite tea and not quite anything else, a mixture he had learned from an old neighbor who swore it settled the mind, and she accepted hers without question. "I worry," she said, "that I've brought this into your house." "You brought yourself into my house," he said. "The rest of it is paperwork." She was quiet for a moment. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" She turned the cup in her hands. "Someone who needed filling. A house that needed a woman in it the way a barn needs a roof for function. I expected to be useful. I expected to be tolerated. And instead I find myself talking to someone at 2 in the morning about legal strategy and bad tea," she said. "Which is entirely different." "Is it better?" he asked. She looked at him over the cup. "Considerably," she said. The dissolution came through on a Tuesday again, which seemed to Elias like the kind of symmetry that a less practical man might find significant. He was in the south field when Clara came across the grass toward him with the advocate's letter held up in one hand. He saw her face before he saw the letter. He had learned to read her face by then, all the small movements of it that she allowed when she was not guarding against them. And what he saw in it now was relief so thorough it had gone past relief into something quieter and more final. Like a fence post driven to its proper depth. Done, she handed him the letter. He read it. Done, he said. Done, she said. They stood in the south field with the wind moving over the grass and the particular pale November light lying across everything with the impartiality of good judgment. He folded the letter and gave it back to her, and she tucked it into her coat. Then he picked up the fence post he had been setting and drove it the rest of the way into the ground and tamped the earth around it, and she stood beside him and watched, and that was the whole of the celebration, and it was exactly enough. He asked her properly that evening. He had prepared nothing for it, no particular speech, no arrangement of objects or atmosphere, because those things would have been wrong for who they were. He simply came in from the cold with his hands still dirty from the last of the day's work and found her at the kitchen table writing something, and he stopped in the middle of the room and he said, "I want to ask you something." She looked up. "This started as a practical arrangement," he said, "and it still is. I want you to know I mean the practical part fully. You can keep the accounts and manage the animals and tell me when the root cellar ventilation is wrong, and I will listen, and I will fix it or let you fix it, whichever is more efficient." That part doesn't change. She was very still. "But I want you to know," he said, "that it's not only the practical part I'm asking about. I'm asking about the other part too, the part where I look for you when you're not in the room. The part where this house is different now in a way that has nothing to do with the accounts." She folded her hands on the table. There were ink marks on two of her fingers. "I know what part you mean," she said. "Then you know what I'm asking." The lamp between them made a steady light. Outside, the wind had dropped. The cottonwood stand was probably bare by now, he thought, though he hadn't checked in a day or two. He would plant more in the spring, taller ones along the east boundary. "Yes," she said. Not yes, I'll think about it. Not yes, probably. Yes. Clean and considered and final, the way she said all the things she meant. They were married in December by the circuit minister who passed through every 6 weeks and who performed the service in the main room with Edgar Prout and his wife Mabel as witnesses. Mabel cried, which Edgar later described as entirely predictable. Edgar himself did not cry, but was unusually quiet for several hours afterward, which Elias interpreted as his version of the same thing. Clara wore a dark blue dress that she had made herself from fabric she had ordered in October, and Elias noticed she had taken in the hem with extremely even stitching. He noticed this because he was looking for the things she had put care into, and there were several. He wore his good coat, which she had brushed that morning without asking him and hung by the door. He noticed that too. The minister asked the words and they answered them plainly. When it came to the vow, Elias looked at her and said the required words in his ordinary speaking voice, not elevated for the occasion, and she looked back at him and did the same, and both of them knew that the real vow had already been spoken in a dozen different languages over the preceding months. In accounts kept and gates fixed and bad coffee and a field in November, and a question answered with one word. It snowed that evening. It snowed a great deal, actually, more than was entirely convenient, and by morning the track to the road was impassable and they were confined to the house and the near outbuildings for 2 full days. Edgar had ridden out before the worst of it, carrying the news of the marriage in his coat pocket like a man who has been given a pleasant duty. The house was quiet. On the second morning of the snow, she came downstairs and found him already at the kitchen table with the ledger open, making a column of figures for the spring. She made the coffee and brought 2 cups and sat across from him and took out her own small notebook in which she kept her own version of certain numbers. They sat together in the snowlight for a long time without speaking, each working, the scratch of 2 pens the only sound, the coffee going from hot to warm to cool on the table between them. He looked up at some point, not for any particular reason, and found her already looking at him, which meant she had looked up first and then waited for him to catch her. She did not look away when he did. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. He went back to his figures. She went back to hers. The snow went on falling outside the window, soft and even, covering the track and the fence posts, and the bare cottonwood stand with the same unhurried patience with which all true things eventually make themselves known. In March, she told him she was expecting their child. She told him in the kitchen in the morning, on a day that had begun like any other and would now never be that kind of day again. She stood at the kitchen window with her back to the room and said it in a voice that was steady but had something underneath the steadiness that was neither fear nor happiness alone, but rather both together, the way the deepest things tend to come. He set down what he was holding. She turned to face him. He had the feeling, looking at her in that morning light, that this was the moment the house had been built toward, not in any mystical way, but in the plain way of things that accumulate their true purpose slowly and reveal it only when the time is ready. 4 rooms downstairs, 2 up. A sleeping loft finished by lantern light, a root cellar with ventilation fixed on the south side, a pantry shelf that was perfectly level, room for more, he thought. He had built it that way without knowing why. He knew why now. "Are you well?" he said. "Yes." "Are you frightened?" She thought about it with her characteristic honesty. "A little," she said, "not of the child, of how much I wanted to be well." He crossed the kitchen to where she stood. He stood beside her at the window and looked out at the land with her, at the March mud and the coming green of it, at the cottonwood stand in the distance putting out the first pale suggestion of leaves, at the fence line running straight and even to the horizon. "It will be well," he said. She leaned slightly against his shoulder, just slightly. He was not sure she was even aware of it. He was very aware of it. "You don't know that," she said. "No," he said, "but I intend it." The child was born in November on a morning that smelled of wood smoke and cold earth in the upstairs room that faced east. It was a girl. She arrived with a remarkable amount of purposeful complaint, which Clara later said suggested a personality that took no great mystery to understand. Elias held the child afterward with the same careful precision he applied to delicate materials, and the child looked up at him with the enormous and uninformed attention of the newly arrived, and he looked back. The leather satchel was still on the small table by the eastern window. He had never looked inside it beyond the documents she had shown him that first night, and she had never asked him to. But she brought it down herself that evening, after the child was sleeping and the house was quiet, and she set it on the kitchen table and opened it fully and began to take out the contents one by one and set them in front of him. A photograph of her mother, a packet of letters from a friend she had lost, a small book with a broken spine, a folded piece of paper with her own handwriting that turned out to be a list, written in her careful hand, of things she had wanted her life to contain. He read it. She had written it years ago, she said, before the marriage that went wrong, even. She had put it in the satchel and then not looked at it for a long time because looking at it was too difficult. He read down the list. He looked up at her. "Most of it," he said, "most of it is this." "Yes," she said, "the part about the horses," he said, "we could work on that in the spring." She laughed, fully this time, not the small reluctant version. The real one, which he had come to know as one of the best sounds the world contained. He folded the list carefully and gave it back to her, and she put it back in the satchel and set the satchel down on the floor beside her chair rather than taking it back upstairs. He thought that meant something. He thought it meant she did not need to keep it close at hand anymore in the way a person keeps something close when they are not sure it is safe to leave it anywhere else. They sat together at the kitchen table by the lamp. The child slept upstairs in the room he had finished by lantern light on sleepless nights, in the crib he had built in October from the same wood he had been saving for something and had finally understood what. The wind moved through the cottonwood stand outside, which was bare now but would come back in spring the way it always came back, patient and certain, and entirely indifferent to anything so small as winter. He picked up his pen and drew a line in the ledger. New column, spring supplies. He would need more timber. He would need the fence on the east boundary extended. He would need, he thought, probably another shelf in the pantry before long, and possibly a room rearranged, and almost certainly a larger root cellar within the next 2 years. Clara opened her notebook beside him and began her own column of figures, the ink marks reappearing on her fingers in their familiar pattern, her handwriting moving across the page in that same unhurried precision he had first seen in the letter she had sent him from a city he had never visited, in the month when the house was clean but not warm, when the rooms held everything he had built and nothing yet of everything he had not known to want. The house was warm now, fully warm, the kind of warmth that means something lives there. Outside, the cottonwood stand stood in the November dark, the planted trees of a man who had wanted something that would still be there when he was gone, doing exactly that, leafless and patient and certain of spring.